Now, Visual Studio Code is our cross-platform, lightweight, open-source development environment. And you can come here to code.visualstudio.com. There's a big green button. You can just download it right away. It's about 50 meg download. Sets up and installs in under a minute. Not something you see from Microsoft every day. But I'm not going to install a stable build. I've got something called the Insiders build installed on my machine already. Now, the Insiders build is the same build that we use to develop VS Code. It ships every single night. And what's great about it is basically the next day, you have access to new features and bug fixes, literally the same ones that we do. So we're going to use that build for this demo today. So the first thing, since I'm in my tool, I want to customize it to work and feel the way that I work. And so right away, I'm going to change the theme to work for me. You can see built in, we have a bunch of light and dark themes that you can pick from, some nice ones. Oh, there's a red one. Scott would probably like that one. Goes along with his shirt. But what we're going to do is we're going to come down here. You can install additional color themes. And we're going to go out to the marketplace, where the community has literally contributed hundreds and hundreds of themes that you can go and pick from. And one of the cool ones that I like recently is one by a guy named Wes Boss. And I'm going to click on Install. It's called Cobalt 2. And you get a nice little preview down here. It's pretty cool. And it's already installed. All I have to do is click on Reload, and we'll restart the tool. We'll go back to the color theme, and you can see I can set it to Cobalt. Right? So now we've got a nice theme that we can start to work with. OK. So now that we've customized the environment, I want to bring up some code and start working on that. I'm going to click on this web folder that I've been working on. And right away, what we see is we get a prompt from the tool because the workspace says, hey, I've got a set of extensions that if you install those extensions, you're going to have a great experience developing this particular application. And so what it recommends to us is this thing called the Node Pack for Azure. And it's installing it right away. But what it is a collection of really cool extensions for developing Node applications against Azure. It helps you get started very quickly. App Service, Functions, Cosmos DB, Scott talked about Docker. That's already installed. I can just click on Reload, and now we're ready to go and start programming our application. So I'm going to bring up some code now, app.js. And a couple things about this. Well, first off, I should say, one of the great things that VS Code does is it brings a great editing experience. The great editing experience is traditional for Microsoft and Visual Studio across platform. So one of the cool things that I can do, I love doing this. If I want to go and change a few lines of code here, I hate using let. If I can use a const, I use a const. So I can select that. I can press Command-D, and I'm just going to go set a number of cursors across all those lines, and I can change those to const very, very quickly. So a very rich editing experience out of the box with just plain JavaScript. I get Intellisense against my objects that I'm using because it's driven by the TypeScript compiler in the background, which can figure out a whole bunch of stuff about my plain JavaScript. You don't have to use TypeScript, but we use it to give you a better, richer development experience. So great editing right out of the box. So let's go, and we're going to run this application. I'm going to press F5. And what's going to happen is Node is going to start up on this machine. You can see now the app is listening on port 3000. We'll go back over to the browser. Just go to localhost 3000. And what's going to happen is our app will come up here inside the browser. And this is a Smart Hotel 360 application. Let me just take a second and explain what Smart Hotel 360 is. It's a fictitious company, a worldwide chain of hotels, and it's really trying to highlight the future of connected travel. And throughout this keynote this morning, you're going to see applications and demos all based on the Hotel 360 application. So in this case, what we've got is a map, and we can see different hotels that are part of the chain, and I can click on them, and I can see, hey, you know what? The sentiment for the Platinum Hotel, not very good. We could delve into that later, but the bigger problem is in this application. This chart on the left-hand side, well, it doesn't exist. There should be one there. So we want to go and figure out how we can get this to show up. So I'm going to go back over to VS Code. And remember, the app is still running. I haven't stopped the debugger. I can put a breakpoint here on line 19. And if I refresh the page, we're going to end up breaking back in our running application on our machine. So awesome. The second great thing about VS Code, it has a great lightweight debugger built right in. And I can do everything that you expect. I can step into multi-line statements. I can hover over and see what variables are. I can set another breakpoint, and I can just press run, and we'll run all the way down here. And we get down to the bottom where we're rendering this page. I can drill in. I get a hover tip. I can see that I've got basically a bunch of undefined objects in my application. Right? Debugging is awesome. I can figure out flow control. But understanding what's going on there, sometimes I need a little bit more help. So what I could do is go on to Stack Overflow or post an issue in GitHub. But that could take some time. And since we're in a keynote demo, we should probably do things a little bit faster. So what I'm going to do is switch over to Slack here. And I've got a colleague, Amanda, who is awesome at JavaScript. So I'm going to say, hey, Amanda, I need help now. And hopefully, oops, help now 11. Hopefully she's around. All right, she's going to be right there. So at this point, what I could do is, I could do a screen sharing session with Amanda, but maybe there's stuff on my screen I don't want to share. I've got email open, who knows what's in there, and I don't want to share that with her. Or, there's lots of different ways I could do it. But really, if you look at the history of Visual Studio and developer productivity, starting with Intellisense and debugging, IntelliTrace and time travel debugging, we've really done a great job of sort of advancing the productivity of developers. And what I want to do now is give you a sneak peek at what I think is sort of the next big wave of developer productivity. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a collaborative development and debugging session with Amanda, who's remotely located. So to do that, I'm going to come down here. I'm just going to click on Share. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a connection to my workspace on my machine that I can then share with Amanda. There's a link to it. I'll go back over to Slack, and I'm going to paste this in. And now Amanda and I can start to work together.
So what's awesome here is that I can just copy this link and go to my favorite code editing experience, Visual Studio, and go to Join Collaboration Session. Now that's going to pick up what's automatically on the clipboard, and I just click Join. And what's happening here is that my Visual Studio, which is personalized for my use so that I'm the most productive, is actually connecting remotely to Chris's workspace, which is hosted in VS Code. And so what you see here is that we have the Solution Explorer automatically loaded with all of his files. I can expand WebUtil, for example, and look at some other files here. Or I can go back to app.js, which is, I think, where he's editing, and I can actually see that, yes, in fact, he is editing here. We see his cursor right there. There's Chris. So Chris, how can I help you today? We're probably on a voice chat at this point, so let me know, how can I help?
All right, so Amanda, this loop seems to be giving me a problem. Data.tweets comes in. I've got lots of tweets and sentiment data. But I want to get down here to the render method. The sentiment with level keeps coming back with a bunch of undefined objects. I have no idea what's going on. I was hoping maybe you could help me out.
So what's awesome is, obviously, as he's describing the problem to me, I'm actually seeing it be highlighted in my code editor. So I know exactly what he's talking about. But further, because this is actually based on a connection that has all of the files that his code depends on his machine, I can actually do things that are based on like semantic code navigation, for example. So I can go to peak definition, look up the get happiness level, and actually look at what's going on there. So I get the full kind of navigation experience that you would expect from Visual Studio with this experience. All right, Chris, I don't yet know what the problem is. Can you reproduce it for me?
You bet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to, say, line 19. I'm going to set a breakpoint. Then I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to share a debugging session with Amanda. And like we saw before, what will happen is Node will spin up on my machine. She doesn't have Node installed on her machine. I'll go back over to the browser. We'll refresh the page. And then what will happen is we'll hit the breakpoint on my machine and on her machine.
So what's awesome about this is as Chris hits the breakpoint on his machine, Visual Studio is actually also hitting the breakpoint. It's the same exact debug breakpoint. Awesome? Awesome, yeah. Further, Visual Studio actually goes into a full debug mode. So I have all of the debug windows that you would expect from Visual Studio when you were in a normal debug session. I have the locals window. I can kind of expand things, look at data, et cetera, look at the call stack. But further, because we're actually sharing the debug cursor, I can even advance the debug cursor by just going step over a couple of times, and we can step over it. And I can see here that S is actually 0. OK, Chris, at this point, I know what the problem is. It's actually a rookie JavaScript mistake. So why don't you stop debugging, and I'll let you know how you can never run into this ever again.
All right, let's fix that rookie mistake. I'll stop the debugger.
All right, I'm going to go to the top of the file, and I'm just going to take advantage of one of the features that's my favorite aspect of the fact that TypeScript is powering the JavaScript language service, which is that I can actually use the TypeScript compiler as a JavaScript linter. So I can go ahead and just write TS check here. And even though we're in a JavaScript file, it's actually using the TypeScript compiler to do type checking on my JavaScript. And so what we see now is that I actually have a a type checking error, which is that the property sentiment doesn't exist on the type string. So what happens here is that you're going over an array, and if you use the let-in expression over an array, then you go over all of the enumerable properties of the array object. It's kind of a weird JavaScript idiosyncrasy. But if you use let of, so if I just go ahead and edit this and change that to let of, then you'll actually see that the squiggle should go away and everything should be fixed up. So why don't you try it again?
Awesome. Errors are gone on my screen as well. So all right, let's see if this works. I'll press F5. Again, we'll start up the runtime in the debugger. We'll reload the page. And once the site comes up now, I should be able to click on one of the hotels, see the sentiment on the right, and now my chart shows up on the left. Thank you very much, Amanda. Appreciate that.
Anytime, Chris. See you later.
All right, let's go stop that debugging session. All right, now that we've got our front-end application working, let's go deploy this thing to the cloud. And to do that, what we're going to do is use Azure App Service. Now, Azure App Service is our fully managed, hosted web and API platform for hosting our web applications. What's really cool about Azure App Service is you can run any sort of workload, Node, C#, .NET, obviously. But what I'm excited about doing today is the fact that you can actually bring your own container to Azure App Service, which literally means you can run any type of web app on our infrastructure. You worry about your application. We'll worry about scaling it and keeping it up and all that goodness. So let's go and do that right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my Docker file that's in my application. I'm just going to right-click on it. I'm going to say Build Image. And this is contributed by that Docker extension that we installed earlier. And that creates the image. We'll go over here to our Docker extension, expand that a little bit. You can see that we've got the image now on the machine, web.latest. That's what we just created. I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to tag it. And when I tag it, I'm basically giving it a name so that it tells Docker when we do a push, which is what we'll do right now. We'll Docker push, where to push it to. And by virtue of the fact it's the SH360 registry, this is an Azure Container Registry, a private Azure Container Registry that I've got for my application that I can use to put and host images up in the cloud. All right, so now that the image is now up in my private registry, I can go down in the extension again, drill into the registry. I can see the repository that we just pushed to, and there's the image. So what I'm going to do, if I want to quickly try this out, I'm just going to right-click and deploy the image to Azure App Service. It's going to ask me a couple of questions. What's the resource group, which basically defines the application up in Azure? And it's going to ask me what the plan is. And the plan is basically the machine that it's going to run on. And you'll notice just by virtue of the name, but in reality what it is, it's a Linux machine. So it's going to run our container on a Linux machine in the Azure App Service environment. And now we just need to give it a name that'll show up on the internet. It'll say SH360 Web, and we'll uniquify it a little bit. And we'll hit Enter. So what's going to happen now is on that machine, we're going to go and provision that web application. That'll only take a second to do. And once it provisions the web application, we're going to set some properties on it. We're going to say, hey, here is the image and the registry to go pull from, which is what we've done here. And we've restarted the site to sort of get it going. And now we've got a link to our application hosted in the cloud. And now I can hold down Alt, click on that, and we're going to browse to the site. And what's happening now is basically it's doing a Docker pull on that machine and pulling it down. And then it'll load up the container, run it, and we should see our site here in just 1 second. There we go. There's our site running up in the cloud. We click on it. We can see we've got the fix for the application that Amanda helped us out with earlier. So that's awesome. That's kind of the front end of the application. We got that deployed to the cloud. Let's go look at what's going on the back end of the application. Now, what we do in this app is when tweets come in, we basically pull them off the wire and we persist them in Azure Cosmos DB. Now, Azure Cosmos DB is our fully managed, globally distributed, highly scalable NoSQL database in the cloud. And what we do is we come in and we pull them into a document database, and using the Cosmos DB extension, I can drill down in here. There's my tweets database, my tweets collection. And here are all the tweets that we've collected over time. You can see kudos to Platinum Hotel, things like that. So this is how we can store our data. And Cosmos is a great solution for this problem because as more hotels come online worldwide, Cosmos will provide me turnkey data replication worldwide just by clicking a couple checkboxes, guaranteed throughput, and very, very fast or low latency. So it's going to scale with my application. But not only do we sort of pull the tweets in, we do some analysis and processing on these tweets once we get them. And to do that, we actually use a serverless Azure function. And a serverless Azure function is perfect for this scenario as well, because whether I'm getting one tweet or a million tweets, the function will scale up or scale down, and I only end up paying for the compute processing that I use to do that. So let's go see what that looks like. I'm going to come back up to my Explorer. I'm going to right-click and say Add Folder to Workspace. And this is one of the new features of Visual Studio Code that just released in stable a couple of days ago. And I'm going to add this to the workspace, and this is something we call multi-root workspaces. So now what we have is two top-level folders that we can work with together in one sort of group. And this is the function that runs whenever a tweet comes in. So what I'm going to do is come in here to index.js, and this is what happens. We get the tweet in, we analyze the tweets, we call Microsoft the Azure Cognitive Services, and use text analytics to analyze the text to generate the sentiment, and then we go and we save it back off to a graph in Cosmos DB. Now, functions are awesome because they run up in the cloud and they scale out and everything, but they're also difficult to sort of debug. But with Azure serverless functions, what we can do is actually run them and debug them locally on our machine. So what I can do, just like we did with our app running locally, I can come in here, I'll put a breakpoint on line 11. I'm going to go to my debug view, and because we're in multi-root mode right now, I can pick the target that will load up the function and press play. And what's going to happen at this point is we're going to load the Azure function runtime on my machine. This is the same runtime same runtime that runs up in the cloud. And what happens is whenever someone tweets about it, data changes in the cloud, but we break in our function locally on our machine. And so I said, whoops, because somebody already tweeted about it, and we broke on our function. But we can have a little bit more fun with that. So I'll press play. And so what I need everybody to do right now is take out your phones and tweet, I love #SmartHotel360. And what will happen is once you do that, we will hit the breakpoint. Boom. So if somebody tweeted about it, thank you very much. And then we can sort of step and do all the great debugging experiences that we saw earlier. But again, this is all triggered off data that's changing up in the cloud, debugging locally on my machine. So what we can do now, once we're done with that, we can come back over to our workspace. I could right-click, and then using the Azure Function application, I can deploy this up to the cloud, and then I'm happy to work with it. And so what we've seen here this morning is a great lightweight code editor. We've seen hosting and publishing of Docker images to the cloud. We've seen a collaborative development and debugging experience. We've seen planet-scalable data access, and we've seen functions that can run locally and in the cloud. It really is a great time to be a developer. Thank you very much.